So you wanted to hear directly from police officers about the George Floyd case,
Right.
about how they felt about it all.
Yeah.
And we found this Reddit thread where officers were sharing their immediate reactions, their unfiltered reactions.
Really raw stuff.
Yeah. And we're going to take a deep dive into it today.
Wow.
It's pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, I bet.
It really is.
So, like, how did they react?
Well, the interesting thing is that most of them weren't defending Derek Chauvin at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were really angry at him, a lot of disgust.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, like, what were they saying?
Well, the top comment on the thread, it just kind of sets the tone. It
Yeah.
says, "This officer violated the rights of George Floyd and murdered him through his actions. The officers who were on scene and failed to act are just as responsible."
Wow, so they're calling out not just Chauvin,
Right.
the other officers, too.
Exactly. And there's this feeling of shame
Oh.
throughout the thread. One officer even said it would be a long time before he could polish his badge back to a shine.
That's heavy.
Yeah. Why do you think that shame is so significant in this?
You know, it seems like it's not just about feeling guilty personally,
Okay.
but, like, it points to maybe a shift in the whole culture of policing.
Interesting.
Because for so long, there's been this unspoken code, the
Yeah.
blue wall of silence,
Right.
where officers protect their own no matter what.
Even if they do something wrong.
Exactly. But here, you see these officers breaking that code,
Wow.
and they're publicly condemning what Chauvin did and acknowledging that it hurt their whole profession.
So are you saying that this shame could actually lead to some positive changes?
I think it's possible.
Okay.
I mean, by admitting that there are serious problems, within their ranks,
Yeah.
these officers are opening the door for some real reform.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But of course, that's just the first step.
Right,
There's a
right.
lot more work to be done.
So to really understand this case, we need to talk about something that kept coming up in this Reddit thread.
Yeah. What's that in?
Positional asphyxiation.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So positional asphyxiation, it's when someone can't breathe because of the position their body is in.
Oh, okay.
And in this case, because Chauvin was kneeling on Floyd's neck
Yeah.
and Floyd was handcuffed and lying face down,
Right.
it literally prevented him from getting enough oxygen.
Wow.
And the officers on this thread, they were very clear that every single officer in America is taught about this danger in the academy.
Yeah, one officer actually said that even though some departments allow neck restraints,
Right.
they're all taught not to put pressure on the back of someone's neck or head when they're on the ground and handcuffed.
Exactly. And, that means this wasn't just a mistake or bad judgment.
Yeah.
It was completely ignoring basic safety rules.
Wow.
And ultimately, it was ignoring a human life.
Which brings us to another really troubling part of this whole thing.
Yeah.
The other officers who just stood there and watched
Right.
and did nothing.
It's hard to understand.
Yeah. I mean, is this where that blue wall of silence comes in?
I think it definitely plays a role.
Oh, okay.
I mean, imagine the pressure to conform, to not speak out against your fellow officers.
Right.
It could be ostracized or even face retaliation.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is. But some officers in the thread were saying it wasn't just about protecting Chauvin.
Okay.
It was a deeper failure to do the right thing
Mm.
when they were witnessing something so obviously wrong.
Yeah, one officer shared a story that really stood out to me.
What was that?
He said that one time, in a really stressful situation, he actually pulled his gun on some teenagers.
Oh, wow.
And immediately, 3 of his fellow officers intervened.
Really?
They physically pushed his gun down, and they stopped him from potentially doing something tragic.
That's incredible.
It really is. And it makes you compare it to the Floyd case.
Yeah.
If those officers were willing to step in when their colleague overreacted in that situation,
Right.
why didn't anyone do the same when Chauvin was clearly using excessive force?
It's a powerful question.
It really is. And it makes you wonder if the blue wall of silence is just an excuse. And the real problem is that officers are just unwilling to challenge authority.
Yeah, even when it's being abused.
Exactly.
That's a huge issue.
It is. And that makes me think about Chauvin's history,
Yeah.
which was brought up a lot in Thread.
Yeah.
Turns out this wasn't his first time using excessive force.
No.
Several officers mentioned that he was reportedly involved in 2 other deaths.
I remember that.
Yeah, there's a comment that says he's apparently been involved in at least 2 other deaths, including shooting a fleeing suspect in the back.
Wow.
And another one clarifies that in 2006, Chauvin and 5 other officers fatally shot a man named Wayne Raz, who was fleeing a police chase.
Oh my gosh.
And then in 2008, Chauvin shot an unarmed man named Ira Latrell Tolles.
That's a disturbing pattern.
It really is, and it raises serious questions about accountability.
Yeah, how can officers with that kind of history be allowed to keep working?
Right. How is that possible?
And, it points to a bigger problem within police departments themselves.
Yeah, a systemic problem.
Exactly. It really does seem like that whole thing with Chauvin's past, it really sparked this whole conversation about accountability.
It did, yeah.
You see this frustration in the thread, where officers are talking about how there needs to be better ways to catch this kind of behavior,
Right.
to stop officers who have a history of using too much force
Yeah.
from staying on the force.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about complaining. They
Yeah.
were actually calling for real changes.
Yeah, they were really criticizing their own institutions.
Yeah.
It's not just about punishing individuals, it's about fixing the whole system.
Right, right.
So this kind of stuff doesn't keep happening.
Yeah, and they had specific ideas.
They did.
Like more thorough background checks before hiring anyone.
Yeah, stricter rules about using force.
And independent investigations when shootings happen.
Right, and even having civilian oversight boards with real power to hold the police accountable.
Wow. I hadn't realized how much this whole incident made officers rethink their own profession.
Yeah, it seems like the George Floyd case was a real turning point.
Yeah.
It forced everyone, even the police, to confront some really hard truths
Like what?
about racism in the system, about implicit bias, and about abuse of power.
And they were suggesting some pretty big changes.
Yeah,
One that kept coming up was diversifying the police force.
that's a big one.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, if the police actually reflect the communities they're in,
Yeah,
there's a better chance of building trust,
that makes sense.
breaking down those barriers that cause fear and suspicion.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk about mandatory body cameras.
Oh, yeah. Body cameras can really help with transparency and accountability.
Right.
They protect both the officers and the civilians
How?
because there's an objective record of what happened.
Oh,
Of course, there are worries about privacy and making sure they're used correctly.
yeah.
But overall, most of the officers on that thread seem to think that body cameras are a good thing.
And another idea that really stuck with me was all the talk about de-escalation techniques.
Yeah, it seems like more and more people are realizing that not every situation has to end in a fight.
Right.
The thread was full of officers saying, we need better training in how to resolve conflicts peacefully, how to communicate better, and how to handle crises.
It's about realizing that force should only be used as a last resort.
Exactly, not the first option.
And there was also a lot of talk about mental health training for officers.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Why?
Because officers are often the first ones on the scene when someone is having a mental health crisis.
Oh, that's true.
And if they know how to de-escalate the situation
Yeah.
and how to get that person the right help,
Yeah.
it can literally save lives.
Reading through all this, it really seems like this incident made police officers look inward.
It did. There's this real sense of urgency in their comments.
Like they have to take action now.
Yeah, they want to fix this system because they know it's broken.
But they also seem to realize that it's not going to be easy.
Definitely not. They know that changing deeply ingrained cultures and systems is a long and tough process.
Right. It takes time and effort and honest conversations.
Exactly. And a willingness to face some uncomfortable truths.
The thread also talked a lot about the impact of all this on public trust.
Yeah, you read about these officers who have dedicated their lives to serving their communities,
Right.
and then that trust is shattered by the actions of a few.
Yeah, it must be tough.
It is. They talk about how they now have to work even harder to prove themselves.
To rebuild those relationships.
Exactly.
There was this one comment that really stayed with me. An officer said, "It's going to be some time before I can polish my badge back to a shine."
That's such a powerful image.
It really is.
It shows how much responsibility they feel.
Yeah.
They know that every interaction they have,
Right.
every decision they make,
Yeah.
could either build trust or destroy it.
This Reddit thread, it's given us so much to think about.
It really has.
It shows just how much police officers are dealing with. It's
Hmm.
not just about fighting crime.
Right.
It's about all these complicated societal issues
Yeah.
and trying to rebuild trust with communities that have been hurt and let down.
It seems like the George Floyd case was a wake-up call
It really was.
for the whole country.
Yeah.
You had started this conversation about policing in America.
A really difficult conversation.
It is, but one that we have to have.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that stood out to me in the thread
What's that?
was how many officers were talking about needing to be more empathetic,
Yeah,
like approaching policing with more empathy.
right.
Do you think that's even possible?
Tough question.
Yeah, I mean, given like the power dynamics in those situations, it's hard to imagine.
It's not easy, but the officers in this thread,
Yeah.
they seem to think it's essential.
Really?
Yeah, they talk about how important it is to treat every person with dignity,
Yeah.
respect.
Regardless of what's going on.
Exactly.
Like seeing them as human beings, not just criminals or suspects.
Right.
And that idea, of seeing everyone's humanity,
Yeah.
it seems to connect to all that talk about de-escalation
Oh, definitely.
that we were discussing earlier.
It's about understanding that you don't always have to use force.
Right.
You can use your words, you know?
Yeah.
You can really listen to what the other person is saying
Right.
and try to resolve things peacefully.
Like sometimes the best way to protect and serve is to take a step back and just listen
Yeah.
and try to find a way to de-escalate the situation.
That's not always easy, though.
No, especially when you're under pressure.
Right. And feeling threatened.
Yeah.
But these officers, they seem to get it.
They do.
That violence should always be the last resort.
Yeah. Never the first option.
Exactly.
And there was this other thing that kept coming up.
Okay, what was that?
It was this idea that we need to be addressing the root causes of crime. Instead of just reacting to it after it happens.
Right, and that's where community policing comes in.
Right.
It's about building those relationships.
The community.
Exactly. And understanding their needs.
Yeah.
And working together to solve the problems that lead to crime in the first place.
So like what kind of problems?
Poverty,
Right.
lack of opportunity, systemic racism.
Those are huge issues.
They are.
Yeah.
So it's about going beyond just enforcing the law.
Right.
It's about being part of the community.
And helping to build it up.
Yeah. And providing social services.
That's a whole different approach.
It is.
Yeah.
This Reddit thread, it's been eye-opening.
It really has.
It's like we got to see inside the minds of police officers,
Yeah.
their struggles, their hopes,
Yeah.
and their dedication to making things better.
For their profession and for the communities they serve.
Exactly.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. It shows that while there aren't any easy solutions,
Right.
we can't stop talking about this. We have to keep the conversation going.
It's through these open and honest discussions and a willingness to challenge the way things are
That's how we create change.
that we can finally start to build a more just and equitable system.
Serve everyone.
So in this deep dive, we saw how the George Floyd case changed things.
Yeah,
It really exposed some deep problems within law enforcement.
it did.
But we also saw how police officers themselves are reacting.
Right.
And they're calling for reform
Yeah, they want to build a better future.
for their profession.
And for the communities they're a part of.
And it leaves us with a question to think about.
Okay.
What can we do as individuals and as communities
To support positive change in law enforcement.
to make sure that tragedies like George Floyd's never happen again?